Hi everyone! For those of you who are visiting my channel for the first time, I'm Mika Kim and I'm currently a software engineer at a FAANG company. Prior to that, I used to be a consultant at Deloitte. So this is a highly requested video since, as you heard from my intro, I started off in consulting and then I moved over to a software engineer role at a tech company. A lot of you have asked me how I made that transition from consulting into software engineering. So in this video, I will talk all about that. So before we start, I want to preface this video by saying that my experience is probably going to be different than your experience. I want to give that caveat that I did study mathematics and computer science during my undergrad. So even before going into consulting, I did have some technical knowledge as well as I've had prior coding experience. So for me, I wasn't starting off all the way from scratch. And so I want to kind of give that as like a background so that when I'm telling my story, it makes a little bit more sense to anyone who's watching this video. So during my time in consulting, I've had kind of two different stages where my mindset changed in regards to wanting to pursue a career in software engineering versus continuing in consulting. And I've had a number of reasons that influenced my decision-making process. There were a bunch of stuff that happened at work and also outside of work. And it's kind of like a long story. So if anyone's interested, I'll probably create another video just talking solely about that. This video is just covering, okay, I made my mind up. I want to try a software engineering career. What should I do? So when I first made that decision, what went through my mind was, it's probably going to be easier trying to transition into a software engineering role internally, so within Deloitte, than try to find a different opportunity outside, as well as it's a bit less risky. So for instance, let's say I tried out software engineering at Deloitte and let's say I hated it. Then I can always just go back into more of a traditional consulting role and pursue that. So in my mindset, I was like, okay, I should probably try to find opportunities within Deloitte first. That's kind of where I started off. Instead of trying to scramble, update my resume, start practicing for coding interviews, I decided to put my focus in finding opportunities within Deloitte first. So I'm going to break out this video into two different chunks, or I'm going to touch on two different points in this video. One being things that I did within Deloitte, and the second part is things that I did outside of my day-to-day work at Deloitte in order for me to have a successful transition into software engineering as a career choice. So as I mentioned, where I decided to start after I made the decision that I wanted to pursue a career in software engineering is to start within Deloitte and find opportunities within Deloitte. So when I first joined Deloitte as like a new grad level consultant, I was just randomly placed into a team. So I had no say into it. I'm sure when the leaders were placing different new grads into different teams and orgs, that they had their own logic and reasoning behind why each new grad went to specific teams. But for me, the luck of the draw was I was put on a functional project where I was doing a lot of BA, so business analyst work, as well as some strategy work. So I spent a lot of my time writing functional specifications for applications. I was also creating a lot of decks, a lot of presentations, prepping for these presentations for this merger work that was happening on this project. So not a lot of that was that technical or had anything to do with coding. And so I was on this project for a while, and this project just kept getting extended for months and months and months. And I was thinking, okay, if I really want to try something new, if I want to try getting a shot at a software engineering opportunity, I need to network. So I will tell you, I am not that good at networking, nor is networking something that I enjoy doing, but it was a necessity to my goal. So I started reaching out to different leaders and partners to see if there were any other technical projects. So by technical projects, I mean you'd be going in as like a software engineer on these digital projects. So I was kind of seeking for these opportunities and asking leaders if they had any openings. So I networked a lot to try to look for more technical project gigs. In consulting, I'm not sure if this is true for every company, but at least for my experience, if you're already placed on a project, and especially if you've been on this project for a while, it is very, very difficult for you to leave this project and go to a different project without good business reason. So it could be anything from political reasons or resourcing problems, because Like, you already know so much of this project, and if you leave this project, they're gonna have to bring someone new and train them from bottom up again. And so because of a lot of these like external and internal reasons, it's very hard for you to just switch projects just because you want to. It kind of doesn't happen that way. So in order for you to leave that project, kind of the easiest way or the more direct and validated way is for another leader or another partner in a project to really need you as a resource for specific reasons and to bring you over. So then what do you do if you want to leave a project and if you want to try something new? So something that folks commonly do in consulting in order to pursue something else is to seek out these extracurricular work, which is basically doing kind of free work on top of your current project work, which sounds very bizarre as it is, but it is a thing. So it's kind of like having like a 9-to-5 job, and then you have this extra work, kind of like your side gig, side project that you do. And these are mostly for internal projects. And the reason why you do them is like, this acts as a good opportunity to prove your skill set to another leader so they can vet your skills and source you into their project. So remember how I said when you're trying to leave a project and when you want to try something new, another leader has to be like, oh, hey, this person has a skill set, so I'm actually going to need to pull this person off and put them on my project and kind of have to advocate you for that way. So these extracurricular projects is a good way for you to showcase who you are to different people, because essentially it's like you're giving them a free trial of your skill sets so that they can be like, oh, this person has worked for me in this extracurricular project and I know they're good. I really want them on my project, so I'll take them in. Like, not the extracurricular, but like a legit client-facing project. So what I did was I networked with a lot of these leaders that I knew owned a lot of technical projects, and I expressed interest in taking more technical and engineering roles. And so I heard that there is this app that was needed to be developed for this internal event at Deloitte, and they were looking for some engineers to do that as kind of like a side project because this wasn't like a client-facing project. So I put my hand up. I said, hey, I'll put in the time to create this app, and I did this on top of the actual client-facing project work that I was doing at the time. So I am not trying to promote this kind of culture where you take on more work, and I will say I was not happy during that time where I had to do my actual work and this like application developing work, because it just took up so much of my time, and that client-facing project work itself already was long hours. So I was not having fun during this time, but for me, it was just kind of like, okay, I need to do this in order to find something else. So I put in that extra work and extra time to do that. After creating that app, I had something under my belt, like another project that I can showcase to these other leaders and saying, hey, I want to take on more software engineering or technical roles. I've created this app for this project. It was successful in ABC ways. And this clearly shows that I'm ready to jump into any project as an engineer. Do you have any openings or opportunities on your projects? And so one of the engineering leaders that I talked to at Deloitte expressed interest, and he kind of took me under his wing. So I was able to transition from more of like a functional strategy consultant type of role into more of like a technical software engineering consultant. So that was kind of like my first foot in the door in terms of transitioning into software engineering. Once I made that initial switch, this partner that I was working for, since he was leading up our front-end engineering team at Deloitte, his portfolio of projects were these kind of engineering work, and every project after that I was placed on was for like an engineering role. I communicated to my partner that I want to be more technical, I want to hone in and grow these skill sets. So I made sure that I was very vocal in terms of what I wanted out of my projects to the partner that I was working with when he was thinking about what projects to place me in. Like, for instance, is this project going to grow my skill sets as an engineer? Is this going to take me out of my comfort zone in terms of project scope that I am leading, etc., etc.? So I made sure that I strategized what projects that I was put on with the partner that I was working with. And honestly, the partner that I worked with at the time was an amazing leader. He genuinely cared about each individual person's growth and interests. So we had a lot of candid and open conversations, and he was able to kind of guide me in the right direction so that I could grow and flourish in this work environment. But I made sure that I always spoke up when something wasn't right. I felt like I wasn't learning. I felt like I needed something new. I always made sure that I communicated that with my boss. And on top of that, this was actually his recommendation. I took some online courses to brush up on modern frameworks. So sure, I have some computer science background from undergrad, but in school, they don't actually teach you how to just code, and especially not with these modern frameworks. So I took extra courses on the side to brush up on frameworks and new technologies. And at Deloitte, at least, they were very generous with learning stipends. And so even some of my friends back at Deloitte took boot camps in order to increase their technical skill sets. So try to see what other learning opportunities, stipends, tuition reimbursements there are at your company. So back to kind of talking about taking on projects that made sense for me at Deloitte. As soon as I kind of had my mind set on trying out software engineering seriously and taking that as a career transition, I made sure I strategized what projects I took on, almost kind of like chess moves. When there are different opportunities presented to you, for instance, when your leader or when someone comes to you and says, hey, here are these projects that you could potentially be on, it's up to you to really analyze and see if this is really going to benefit you and help you move forward to the goal that you're trying to achieve. And this kind of goes for these extracurricular projects as well. I made sure to think it twice and be like, okay, is this actually going to be worth my time investing in doing this project? And will it actually help me move a step forward into becoming a better engineer? I always had that at the back of my mind when I was taking in different work. So at Deloitte, until I quit and left for a different role, I was on these technical engineering projects. And this really helped me move into a software engineering job at another company much more easily than if I just tried to jump from kind of out of nowhere. Because as I mentioned, it's easier to try to make that transition internally. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. I'm just saying it's going to be easier to make that change. And then once you kind of have that skill set under your belt, and once you kind of have these projects and work experience that you can actually write on your resume and talk about during your interviews, then it's a much easier transition when you're actually trying to move into a software engineering job at a tech company. So while I was doing that at Deloitte, on the side, I was also doing other prep work and studying so that I could become a better engineer. Kind of even aside from prepping interviews and things like that, I've kind of had an imposter syndrome almost, being I was a software engineer at a consulting company, so maybe I'm not good enough, blah, 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 blah. And that kind of fueled me into putting more effort into studying fundamentals. So since I was and am still a web developer, now I'm doing front end, but at the time I was doing front end and full stack, I wanted to make sure that I had my JavaScript and React fundamentals down. So I took some courses in regards to that. I built a couple of things myself so that I can play around with the framework, and so that I was very comfortable in that environment and I knew what I was doing. Also, I brushed up a lot on HTML and CSS basics as well, because sure, I knew how HTML and CSS worked and I knew how to build stuff with it, but I really wanted to nail down the basics and fundamentals so that I wouldn't be that kind of engineer that just copy and paste code without really understanding how things work. And another thing I studied was kind of web standards and best practices, so that I could write good, efficient, clean code and not just scrappy code. And this is kind of a lot of time you have to kind of put towards the beginning. And at first it might seem not that important, but I wanted to actually know what I was doing and be very confident in what I was doing. And this kind of initial investment that I did went a long way, because even right now, I think a lot of the things that I studied back then is helping me be a good engineer during my day-to-day job. So I put a lot of time into that. I have no regrets. I think it was a great choice. And when I was kind of prepping to actually leave Deloitte and go pursue a software engineer job at a tech company, thankfully I had a friend who was already in the tech industry at the time as a software engineer, and he guided me a lot and showed me the ropes in terms of how tech recruiting works. Now, for those of you who are watching this video that were kind of like me back in the day, that doesn't know anything about how tech recruiting works, you don't know where to start, I'm creating a video about that, so stay tuned. So back to kind of like how I was prepping outside of my day-to-day work. Like I mentioned, I took a lot of courses to really brush up my fundamentals. And then I just practiced a lot of LeetCode / algorithm style problems. For those of you who are a bit more familiar with how tech recruiting works, these LeetCode algorithm type questions will come up in most interviews. So I made sure that I brushed up on those. And I also did a lot of mock interview questions with my friend. Just kind of coding by yourself is one thing, but having to try to explain that to your interviewer while like coding is like a completely different story. So I put in a lot of time in practicing that. And then once I kind of felt like, oh, I'm not like quite ready, but maybe I should give it a shot. When I thought that, I just started applying. I think it's like a golden rule. You will never be fully ready. So I just started applying. I obviously got a lot of rejections. I effed up so many interviews as well. There are some, like when I think about it, my palms get sweaty, like even just thinking about those interviews that I screwed up. But I had a lot of those, and in the end, I was able to find a company that was like a good match for me. So the TLDR is I tried to take on a lot of technical engineering projects while I was still in consulting so that I could start accumulating these work experiences. And on the side, I studied a lot of the web fundamentals, frameworks, and I did a lot of LeetCode practices on the side so that I could be a better engineer in general, as well as be prepped for these interviews. So as I mentioned, transitioning into software engineering was a little bit more easy for me because I do have that technical background from my undergrad. And so I already knew how to code and I had some of that knowledge already. But for those of you with zero experience and you're just looking for a place to start, I recommend starting off with a beginner online course and just start building something so that you kind of get familiar with programming, how coding works, and even just kind of suss out if this is like a right fit for you or not. Because like maybe you'll try it and like you might just hate it. So I think this would be like a good opportunity for you to also test out if this is like a right fit for you. All in all, I kind of hope this story was at least a little interesting and helpful. But if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments. And if there are any other types of videos you want me to film, also leave them in the comments as well. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.